The sound of snowmobiles used to be the heartbeat of this valley. Before sunrise, before tourists woke up, before the ski lifts even hummed to life, you could hear them cutting clean lines through fresh powder. That trail wasn't just snow. It was freedom. It was family tradition. And it was legally mine. I didn't think much of it at first when I noticed new signs nailed into posts along the trail. White background, red lettering, no motorized vehicles. I laughed, thinking it was some temporary thing, maybe misplaced, maybe meant for somewhere else. Because that trail, it ran across land my grandfather bought in the 1960s. Deeded, surveyed, registered, no HOA anywhere near it back then. But 2 days later, I found a folded notice tucked under the wiper of my truck, official-looking, HOA letterhead. It said snowmobiles were now banned on all shared access trails effective immediately. No discussion, no vote, no warning. I remember standing there in the cold, reading it twice, then a third time, waiting for the punchline. Because here's the part they didn't seem to realize. That trail wasn't shared. It was private, and it just happened to be the only route leading directly to their ski resort. Before I go on, if you enjoy real HOA stories, where entitled boards overstep and get humbled hard, make sure you like the video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily. It helps the channel a lot, and trust me, this one gets wild. I called the number on the notice. A woman answered. Sharp voice, polite, but the kind of polite that feels rehearsed. I explained the situation calmly, told her the trail was on my land and had been used by snowmobiles for decades. She interrupted me halfway through and said the board had decided it was a safety concern. That word again. Safety, the favorite excuse of every HOA that wants control without responsibility. She told me snowmobiles created noise and posed a danger to skiers. I asked how skiers were in danger on a trail they didn't own and didn't maintain. She told me the resort had raised concerns. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about safety. This was about convenience. The resort didn't like sharing access, and the HOA decided to play middleman, thinking I'd just roll over. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I thanked her for the information and hung up. That night, I pulled out the old property maps, the original easements, the county records, everything. And there was in black and white. The HOA had no jurisdiction, no authority, and no legal right to tell me how my trail was used. But instead of fighting them right away, I waited. The weekend came, fresh snowfall, perfect conditions, and suddenly, the resort parking lot was packed. Cars lined the road, skiers everywhere, except something was off. No snowmobiles, no early morning riders, just frustrated resort guests wondering why lift access was delayed. By noon, my phone started buzzing. First, it was an HOA board member, then another, then the resort manager. Voicemails stacked up fast, confused, panicked, angry, because without snowmobiles using that trail, something else stopped too. Maintenance crews, supply, deliveries, emergency access. The trail they banned was the same trail they quietly relied on for everything. And that's when I made my move. I placed a legal gate across the entrance to my property. Locked. Posted. Clearly marked. No trespassing. No access without written permission. Within an hour, someone tried to cut the lock. That's when things went from entitled to desperate. And that's where I'll stop for now. By the next morning, my phone had over 20 missed calls. HOA numbers, unknown numbers, even one from a blocked line. I didn't return any of them right away. Instead, I drove out to the trail. The gate was still standing, lock intact now, fresh boot prints in the snow where someone had clearly tried and failed to force it open overnight. Around 10 o'clock, 2 SUVs pulled up. One had the HOA logo on the door. Other was clearly resort management. 3 people stepped out. Like they were walking into a negotiation they assumed they'd already won. The HOA president did most of the talking. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask permission to be there. She immediately started explaining how my actions were hurting the community and putting tourism at risk. I let her finish, every word, every excuse. Then I calmly asked her to point out exactly where the HOA's authority over my land came from. She blinked, looked at the papers in her hand, then said this trail has always been used by everyone. I nodded and said, use doesn't equal ownership. That's when the resort manager stepped in. Different tone, more nervous. He said they'd assumed continued access because snowmobiles had always been allowed. I told him they were allowed because I allowed them. And the HOA just removed that courtesy without asking. The president snapped back that snowmobiles were banned now, so the trail had no purpose for me anyway. That's when I said the sentence that changed everything. If snowmobiles are banned, then this trail is no longer shared access, which means it's just private land. And private land doesn't stay open out of kindness. The silence after that was loud. They tried pressure next, talked about lawsuits, talked about lost revenue, talked about how I was being unreasonable. I stayed calm. I told them they could reopen access the same way they closed it, with written acknowledgement that the HOA had no authority over my trail and no right to restrict motorized use on private land. The HOA president refused, flat out, said the board would never admit fault, so I smiled and said, then the gate stays. That afternoon, the resort had to delay lift openings because supplies couldn't get through. Guests started complaining. Refunds were issued. Staff were frustrated. And the HOA president, she sent out an emergency email blaming a hostile landowner. That email backfired hard because neighbors started asking questions, real ones. Why was the HOA regulating land it didn't own? Why had snowmobiles suddenly become a problem after decades? And why was the resort suddenly involved? By evening, my driveway turned into a parade of people. Some were snowmobile riders thanking me. Others were homeowners angry. They'd been dragged into a mess they never voted on. One older guy even brought paperwork showing his family used the trail long before the HOA existed. The board wasn't expecting resistance. They were used to people folding. The next day, I got a letter from the HOA's attorney, official, threatening, full of legal language meant to scare someone who hadn't read their own deeds. It claimed the HOA had an implied easement. That night, I forwarded that letter to my lawyer. He called me back 10 minutes later laughing. He said they just admitted in writing they know they don't own it. That's when we decided to escalate. We filed a formal cease and desist against the HOA for harassment, misrepresentation, and attempted interference with property rights. We included survey maps, historic records, and sworn statements. Then we sent copies to the county and the resort's legal team. That's when the resort really panicked. They called again. This time, apologetic. They offered to work something out. I told them any discussion would happen only after the HOA publicly reversed the ban and acknowledged they overstepped. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that night. It didn't go the way they expected. Homeowners showed up angry, loud, asking why the board had picked a fight with the one landowner who controlled access to the entire backside of the resort. Someone asked if HOA dues would be raised to cover legal costs. Another asked if board members were personally liable. The president tried to regain control, but the room had already turned. By the end of the meeting, 2 board members resigned on the spot. And still the gate stayed closed. Snow kept falling. The resort kept bleeding money. And the HOA was finally realizing they'd picked the wrong trail to cross. And that's where things stopped being just about snowmobiles and started becoming about consequences. The following week changed everything. The HOA president sent a formal notice reversing the snowmobile ban, quietly admitting that the trail was private property and that the board had overstepped its authority. No fanfare, no excuses, just a simple acknowledgement that they were wrong. The resort called too. Their tone was apologetic. They promised to respect private land rules moving forward and even offered to coordinate directly with me for any future trail maintenance or access needs. That meant I had control again. The trail was open, but on my terms, not theirs. Neighbors started noticing the shift immediately. People came up to thank me for standing firm. Some had been quietly frustrated by the HOA's overreach for years, but didn't know they had the power to challenge it. Suddenly, homeowners were paying more attention to meetings, bylaws, and notices. The balance of power had changed. I walked the trail one evening, snow crunching under my boots, thinking about how quickly entitlement can crumble when someone refuses to back down. The resort lifts were running smoothly, the snowmobiles buzzing on schedule, and the HOA. They were far more careful now, knowing that not every landowner would tolerate their nonsense. Standing there, watching the sunset over the trail, I realized something important. This wasn't just about snowmobiles. It was about respect, property rights, and knowing your limits. Sometimes the simplest act of standing firm is enough to reset an entire system. If this story inspired you, leave a comment telling me what you would have done if the HOA tried to take over your land. Share this video with someone dealing with HOA overreach. Stories like this help people realize they have more power than they think. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on Karen Stories Daily for more real-life HOA drama that proves entitlement has consequences.